Continue on with the brain and some of the structures. So you guys can review that. It's simply just a description. We already went over the meninges, pia, arachnoid dura. We went over the blood-brain barrier, which are the astrocytes, and choroid plexus produces your CSF that washes the brain, right, which is called cerebrospinal fluid. And then, of course, the casing of the brain that protects it are the bones of the cranium. 3 layers, we went over that. And then we said protection from cranial trauma. Dura matter, you guys can review that. So a lot of this is going to be at this point a review for you to just kind of slow down through and read over whatever you guys want to read over. The dural folds. So this one is fun. We're going to have to look at it. So if I have, here we go. So I have a division between the right and left hemispheres of the big brain, which is the cerebrum. I have this false or falx cerebri. So cerebrum, a false division, right, between the two. Falx cerebri separates the right and left hemispheres. It also has sinuses. So these sinuses are important because this was where we said the CSF eventually travels into after it finishes its path along the 2 lateral ventricles, the 3rd and 4th ventricle, and then it exits into the subarachnoid space. And in order to get the fluid out of the brain again so that we can recycle it, reoxygenate it, and provide more nutrients, I have to take it into the sinuses. So these are just names of the sinuses. So we'll simplify this. I have to have something in the middle, right? So from chapter 1 review, we said it was sagittal. And if there's something above, we call it superior sagittal. And because it's a sinus or a vein, it's called superior sagittal sinus. Well, if I have a superior, I must have a inferior. So the one below is just called the inferior sagittal sinus. And then there's something that's straight. So I just call it the straight sinus. They conference at the point of confluence. So they call this a confluence of sinuses. So these are blood vessels, but they're also related to the falx cerebri, tentorum cerebelli. So they basically sit inside of the dura mater because it's on the epidural space, right? And then the dura mater helps to guide these sinuses to different directions so that I can take it out. If I have something that's transverse, so this is straight sinus, superior sagittal sinus, inferior sagittal sinus, straight sinus, and then they meet at a conference, right? And then they go across, so they call it transverse sinus. And then when they exit the brain, or before they exit, they enter into the sigmoid sinus. And finally out the jugular foramen. And what do you think they become? Hint, hint, jugular foramen. So once it's in the brain, it's called a sinus because it's not really encased by its own hose-like system. It's sitting inside of the epidural folds. So once it exits, simply, it's going to be from the inside, so it's called the internal, and then it's going through the jugular foramen, so that's a landmark. Internal jugular, and now it's no longer a sinus, it's because it's outside of the brain, we call it a internal jugular vein. Simple, right? So these are the blood pathway exiting the brain.